Good afternoon. It's Sunday, May 26, 2024, around 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. You're watching Co-op for Two. Today we're continuing our read-through playthrough of the Dear Holmes series called The Bewildered Blacksmith. Today we're going to be reading letter number 2. We'll do a little recap and then we'll get into it. First, some bookkeeping. On Friday, we played a fan-made case for Bureau of Investigation, that black box game you see behind me there, a Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective spinoff. We played a fan case called The Endless Winter's Tale, which was very good. We had a great time playing it. The author came by at the end, chatted to us a little bit. Really highly recommended, free download if you own the game. What else do we need to talk about? Checking in with the chat. Anna says the fan case for Bureau of Investigation was fantastic. It was quite good. Very well written. All right, well, we've got the normal group here. YouTube says 7 concurrent viewers, 1 like. I'll remind you that the case we're playing today is a 5-letter series released in 2021 to subscribers. I am a current subscriber to Dear Holmes, but their letters have been taking so long to arrive that I've had to put out a call for older subscribers to send me letters. This is the only one I've gotten so far from a viewer, so we're playing through an older case here. This one is made up of 4 letters and then a solution letter. So I have them all now, but we're going through them 1 per week as normal. We are starting at an earlier time these days, 1 p.m. on Sunday, not our normal 3 p.m. We'll see how that goes. You let me know whether you prefer this time or you prefer the 3 p.m. time. All right, let's do a recap. Oh, well, before we do a recap, maybe I should probably get into the habit of doing a little bit of outside the channel YouTube recommendations. There's one interesting video that I just watched by a YouTuber, a very popular YouTuber who reviews cameras. Mostly DSLR, like the cameras that I use for filming here, named Gerald Undone. That's his name, and I think the name of the channel is either Gerald Undone or Undone, whatever. He's got a video talking about the sort of corrupting influence in the review space for cameras with the manufacturers of cameras. You've heard me talk a lot on this channel about how primitive and unprincipled the YouTube board game space is, the YouTube reviewer board game space. It's just not healthy that all of these YouTube channels are trying to make money, and they're doing so by building these cozy relationships with publishers who send them free games, and so they have to say good things about the games or they won't get free copies, and then they're doing paid previews for Kickstarter. It's all very sketchy and unpleasant, and even in the best of circumstances, the unwanted effects on the biasing of the reviewers' opinions. It's just you couldn't get away with this reviewing things in newspapers and magazines, but YouTube is sort of the Wild West of bad incentives. And the other thing that brought this to mind was watching Sam Healey's channel. Sam Healey was a reviewer for the Dice Tower for a while, and he's trying to be ethical. I'm not saying he's not ethical, but what you can see sort of slip through is they're very focused on making a business out of their YouTube channel. And Part of that is this little wink, wink. We've decided we're only going to be positive on this channel. We're never going to say anything bad about a game. If we don't like a game, we just won't talk about it. I mean, it's a very, can you imagine a movie reviewer saying that? We're going to review movies, but if we watch a bad movie, we're just going to keep quiet about that because we don't want to get on the bad terms with the publishers. It's really unhealthy system. We're going to try something different on this channel. One thing is we're not going to try to make a business out of it. But the other thing is, if you do like the content on this channel, I hope you'll consider becoming a Patreon supporter. We purchase all the games we play here ourselves, mostly me. All the equipment is purchased myself. There are no sponsors. There's no relationship with any publishers. It's just us. We're doing it together. And you know the old saying, if you're not the customer, you're the product. Well, here, there's really no customer or product, but to the extent that there's anyone that is being incentivized to be served, to be happy, it'll be the people who are joining me for the playthroughs, commenting on the videos, engaging in discussion, and supporting the channel via Patreon so that we can keep buying all of these games ourselves. If you have old copies of Dear Holmes that you're willing to donate to the channel, or other mystery games, or you want to trade games, please reach out and contact me. It's all welcome. All right, let's get to it. The first letter from last week started a case called the Bewildered Blacksmith. Let's do a little bit of a recap here. We got a letter from this blacksmith. He spent half a page telling us how great his business is going. It's been passed down through his family. I'm trying not to write on these letters like I normally do. It makes it a little more challenging, but won't ruin it for trading. He talks about, for some reason, he's writing to Sherlock Holmes asking for some help, but for some reason he's talking about how his business has picked up recently. There's a carpenter in a nearby town who has been dramatically increasing his need of hand-forged iron nails. Not sure why he mentions this to Sherlock Holmes, but he does. I don't know. Sherlock Holmes doesn't have time for this nonsense, but maybe, Watson is reading this, summarizing it. Okay. So 50 years ago, they've lived in this house. They lived in this house for 50 years. Now, that's sort of important because this kid who shows up, it's not like they've owned this house for 500 years. 50 years, someone could have owned it beforehand and left some treasure on it that needs to be retrieved. But they did buy the house. Okay. So 3 weeks ago, this timing is sort of important. We're starting on 13th of October. 3 weeks ago, he gets woken up. He hears a kid walking on the gravel. Now, I did make some notes about things that I thought were significant. One of the significant things is this gravel driveway is new. He says a long gravel drive added several years ago. Okay, so several years ago, they added this drive. Not that old, but a couple years ago. All right, they hear this kid. He gets woken up by the kid walking on the gravel. He sees him. He's bedraggled, weary, walking aimlessly. No hat, no jacket, no shoes. He wakes up his wife. They go out. They find him in the smithy, curled up, sleeping. It's the warmest place, so they think maybe he went for warmth. He's curled up sleeping, and he doesn't rouse when they walk in. I mean, he's like really sound asleep. They bring him in. They notice a couple things about him that makes him look like he's homeless. So he's gaunt. He needs food. His hair is all matted and greasy, dirty face, right? He's wearing an oversized shirt and an undersized trousers. So dressed weird, filthy. One might think he'd spent a day working in the forge. That's interesting. Okay, so they bring him into the house. They wake him up. He's tired. He doesn't wake up when they prod him and try to get him into the house. So he kind of sounds like he's drugged. They wake him up. He eats like crazy, seeming like he's super hungry. He's already mentioned that he's all gaunt. He's eating like he hasn't had food in days. And all of a sudden, he's back asleep again, can't be roused. That really makes us think he's sort of drugged and hasn't eaten in a while. Okay. They call the doctor, who looks at him, and he's in surprisingly good shape. His teeth are in good shape, kind of unusual for that time in England, even if you're middle class. But here he is. His limbs are straight. He's in pretty good shape. He says it seems like maybe he must have been only hungry recently. But the doctor also says he's completely deaf. And that's why they say he hasn't said anything. That's not quite right. I mean, if he's deaf, it doesn't mean he can't speak. So it's a little unusual that he's not speaking. But he's deaf. Maybe he's also mute. Doctor doesn't say. Now, how old do we think he is? We're told at some point. I believe it was like 7 or 8 years old. Is that right? Chat says, Anna says, I prefer this time. D says, could he fake deafness? I think it's certainly possible. Anna says, I played board games all day. What games did you play? We played Icky with an expansion last night. We can talk about that a little bit later. I think we were told he was 7 or 8, and I forgot to write that down here. Somewhere in the 7 to 10 range. I know we're told. I just didn't write it down here. Okay, now, they call the cops. The cops come. They say, no kids are missing. He's not a runaway. He didn't escape from the reformatory nearby, which is 20 miles away, so how would he have even got here? And they don't know what else to do to find his home. They say, let's just send him to the workhouse. This guy and his wife says, no, I want to keep him. We'll take care of him. We've never had any children. They're growing fond of him. They give him new clothes. They dress him. He's got a good personality. He's pleasant nature. He does chores. They can't get him to say anything. But he doesn't want to leave the house. And one day they had a caller, presumably like just a friend, dressed in a frock coat and top hat, and the kid was terrified. So it sounds like he's scared of someone coming to get him, or he ran away from that this guy might remind him of. Okay, cops keep looking. They have no idea. All right. Now, but the town is starting to hear about it because everyone's talking about it and they're being asked about it. They don't know his identity. They're calling him Edward. All right, then something happens. This is what's caused him to write to Sherlock Holmes. They go to sleep. He's sleeping in the kitchen where he normally sleeps. He's got a makeshift bed, which is the warmest room in the house. Not clear why he needs the warmest room, but that's where he wants to sleep. They wake up, he's gone. They check all around. No one has broken in. All the windows are locked, etc. But the bolt leaving the house is unlocked. In other words, he has left. He has opened the door and left. The bolts to the back door were unlocked and he has left. Okay. They call the police. Police have no idea what could have happened, but they think, hey, he probably just went home. I don't know why we can't find his home, but that's probably what happened, so don't worry about it. He worries that maybe he was coerced into opening the door that night and let out. And then the reason he thinks something fishy has happened, that the kid hasn't just walked home, is he says, beyond the gravel at the top end of their drive. So you take the driveway up to the house. And they're saying at the top end of it, there's a little bit of muddy track which adjoins the main road into Loddon. They see the impression of thin carriage wheels in the mud, as if some vehicle had turned around in the drive. So gone up, turned around, and then left again. But he says the width of the carriage tracks was very narrow, quite unlike those of trade carts that usually come to the forge. So I still assume he's talking about, I don't know if he means the wheels are narrow or the distance between the two wheels are narrow. I assume it can't be like a bicycle. He would have mentioned if there weren't two sets of wheels. But it's not clear what that is. It's also not clear why someone bringing a carriage up the gravel road wouldn't wake our family. And then this guy says, we want help. We think something sinister has happened. Boy didn't say anything, but they're confident he was happy to be with them. The biggest insight that was had while reading this letter was by Rob, who said, hey, if he's deaf, someone coming to the door wouldn't be able to wake him up. That's a very good point. Like, if he's sleeping in the kitchen, someone can't knock on the door and show up and say, hey, psst, come on, it's time to leave. So unless he was faking his being deaf, and even so, you would think maybe the parents upstairs would have heard someone in the driveway and heard someone knocking at the door. So I find that very odd. So what were our running theories here? One theory is that this kid is a sleepwalker and has showed up from some nearby place, although it's not clear why no one has mentioned him being missing. The other idea is that he's escaped from someone. We were thinking, is he escaped child labor? I think there are lots of reasons why that doesn't seem plausible. One is that you don't really have to do illegal child labor here in England back in the 1890s. You just say, here's an orphan kid. He's now working for me full time. I think the other thing is, if we think he's drugged, and he sure does look drugged, then you wouldn't drug a worker. So that doesn't make sense. And why would you, if he's been escaped from someone, why wouldn't he say something about it? And if he's escaped, why would he go to that person who knocked on the door? I still feel like the most likely case is if he's not a sleepwalker. Like, if he's a sleepwalker, then I can see it. He just opens the door one day and then goes on a walk for miles and miles. The other possibility, though, is that he's trying to rob them, steal from them or something, and he's part of some team, and he just makes himself comfortable, and then he escapes. But what's the deal with the cart and the oddness of the cart? I wonder if he's sent here to take something out of this house that they haven't found yet. They haven't found anything missing, though. So I'm at a bit of a loss. I'm going to check in with the chat, but let me see my notes here, what I wrote. It's the good and the only business nearby. So you could see how like a rival blacksmith might be like, let me plant you in this house and you learn all the tricks of the trade, like corporate espionage. Recent driveway. The kid's deaf. Does this increased sales of nails mean anything? Who could have woken him up if he's deaf? If someone did, or did they have a prearranged plan to wake up? Why does he have the mismatched clothes? That definitely seems like not something you would plan. Why wouldn't he have shoes? That does seem like he's sleepwalking of some sort. Why is he so tired? It could be just that he's had a huge walk, or it could be that he's drugged. Why is he hungry? Why is he so hungry? Why is he scared of the visitor in a coat? What kind of wheels left this trail? All right, let's check in with the chat and see any theories. Anna says, the fact he's in good health could suggest he has noble birth, was kidnapped and starved or drugged, maybe for ransom. Interesting. Rob says, one difference with the new letters is they're longer. The old ones feel quite short. Well, it's true. There's 4 letters instead of 3. So they sort of did a trade-off. They made the letters longer, but less of them. So we'll see if we can, we'll see at the end if it feels like a shorter case. Certainly each session feels a little shorter. All right. Well, let's read our next letter and see if things get clearer with letter number 2. Any theories about what letter number 2 is going to hold in store for us? All right, so it's from the Blacksmith, 15 of October, so 2 days later. Dear Mr. Holmes, thank you for your telegram, which arrived earlier today. I cannot begin to tell you how pleased and relieved my wife and I are to hear that you will be looking into this matter for us, and we're delighted to learn that you have already asked your colleague to travel up to Norfolk to assist us. Dr. Watson will be more than comfortable lodging at the Swan in Loddon, for it is indeed a fine hotel. As well as thanking you, I felt it necessary to keep you apprised of developments since my first letter. While we have no further clue as to the whereabouts of young Edward, there have been other odd happenings in the village. Yesterday, I took some time to walk to the rectory to inquire after the vicar of Chedgrave, the Reverend Bill Roper. While I am by no means a religious man and rarely attend church, I have some affection for Reverend Roper, who was a good friend to my parents when they were alive. He has been poorly and confined to his bed for a good 3 months now, and there was some talk locally that the 82-year-old might be on his last legs. While conversing with his wife, and learning that the amiable clergyman is rallying and making something of a recovery, I could not help but ask if Mrs. Roper had heard anything of the missing boy. She confirmed that she had not, but then uttered something very curious. You know he's not the first strange child to appear in the village. I must have looked rather shocked and certainly a little irritated that she had referred to Edward as a strange child. However, she went on to explain that 5 months earlier, she had gone into Loddon to collect a wedding bouquet from Miss Hamer, the florist on the High Street. While being attended to, she heard a noise toward the back of the shop and saw a young child emerge from a door behind the main counter. Knowing that Miss Hamer had never married, and believing therefore that she had no children of her own, Mrs. Roper had asked who the pretty auburn-haired girl was. Miss Hamer then flushed and gave the vicar's wife some garbled story about the shy 5-year-old being the daughter of her late sister who had died of pneumonia the previous winter. With no other relatives to go to, Miss Hamer had apparently taken the girl in. Beyond this, the florist would speak no more and had looked visibly agitated. Without wishing to appear rude to the elderly Mrs. Roper, I asked why she believed the story to be a fabrication. Her answer ran as follows. I knew Miss Hamer had grown up in Bungay, for she mentioned it to me more than once. A couple of weeks after the encounter in the shop, my husband received a visit from the rector of St. Mary's in Ditchingham. I happened to mention Miss Hamer to him, and he said at once that he remembered her family, who had been somewhat troublesome and had lived originally on the outskirts of Bungay, close to his parish. Father ran a local bakery and had been a heavy drinker. He became so unpopular within the parish that he was forced to sell up and move on. taking on the large shop and outbuildings that Miss Hamer now occupies in Loudon. Rector had not seen any of them since that time. Of course, I asked him how many children had been in the Hamer family, to which he replied, 2, an older son, Thomas, and Bethany herself, who was 4 years younger. I wanted to be sure he had remembered this correctly, and then said that I had heard she also had a sister. No, just the 2 siblings, was his reply. Mrs. Roper's conclusion was that the florist's story was a lie, but she had no theory as to why the spinster would concoct such a tale. Rather tentatively, I suggest that she may have had maternal instincts despite never having married, and had perhaps taken in an orphan from the workhouse, something she had been embarrassed to admit. With some vitriol, the dour Mrs. Roper put paid to such a notion. That woman has not a single nurturing instinct or caring bone in her body. I have never seen her do anything but chide any child who had dared to venture into her shop unattended. That will not do, Mr. Golding. I let the matter rest and returned to what I thought would be a more comfortable line of inquiry. Has the Reverend requested any help from the bishop given his incapacity? But Mrs. Roper seemed to find that question objectionable as well. No, he has not. Young Mr. Allen, the curate, is quite capable of delivering all of the regular services and sermons and attends to most pastoral matters. Why would you ask such a question? I felt uncomfortable, but sought to explain. The forge has been very busy recently producing iron nails for Mr. Hoddy in Loudon. I'm grateful for his trade, and last week asked him casually why he needed so many nails. He indicated that there had been something of an increase in the number of old folk passing away recently. Said that as he worked alone, he was finding it difficult to keep up with the demand for new coffins. Remembering that, it made me wonder if the church had struggled with all of the funerals, as I know that the Reverend insists on performing all of the burial services himself. Mrs. Roper then looked somewhat bemused. There have been no requests for burial since my husband became ill. In fact, I think I'm right in saying that the last funeral at the church was 10 or 11 months ago. If there has been a steep increase in deaths, Mr. Golding, they have not been in this parish. Sensing her agitation, I said no more. And returning home, I relayed the story to my wife, who could see nothing remarkable about the account of the child at the florist's, or indeed Mr. Hoddy's pronouncement about deaths in the area. My wife reminded me that he probably organizes services for over a dozen of the local parishes, so these burials could have occurred elsewhere, as Mrs. Roper herself suggested. While I found the revelations at the rectory to be a little unsettling, you can imagine my newfound consternation when I was then told by my wife that a letter had been hand-delivered to our door. The missive came in a plain white envelope addressed solely to Mr. Golding. Inside was a single sheet on which were stuck some words that had clearly been cut from a local newspaper. The message reads, "Forget the boy, he is safe. If you persist, it will be bad for you." No punctuation at all. I will entrust it to Dr. Watson when he arrives, as it may help reveal the identity of the sender. Although there is some mixed comfort in hearing that Edward is likely to be safe, my wife and I are deeply troubled by the explicit threat. We cannot shake the notion that the boy is in the charge of someone who does not have his best interests at heart. Hardly seems like the sort of note any parent would write. Of course, we remain unsure of its author's identity, but there was at least one clue as to the person who had delivered the note. My intuition, having discussed the matter with my wife, was to head back down our gravel drive, and I was glad I did, for in the soft mud at the entrance to our property were further impressions of the same thin carriage wheels I had seen 4 days earlier, the track of each being no more than 2 inches wide. Mr. Holmes, I am now convinced that the owner of that carriage and the person who has taken Edward are one and the same. We will not let this matter rest, and I must thank you once more for agreeing to help us. As you can imagine, we are eagerly awaiting the arrival of Dr. Watson. Yours sincerely, David Goulding. Okay. Let's see what the chat thinks of all this. How many nails is needed for a coffin? Seems pretty ridiculous that an increase in deaths would require big extra orders of nails. I have to agree with you there. Okay, so we've got another child who seems like she might be related, like this boy, have showed up and been taken in, except here we have a strange situation in that it does seem like this girl is in a similar situation, but we're told that the woman who's taken her in doesn't have a kind, caring bone in her body. So the question is, why would this woman, the florist, have voluntarily taken in another girl, a little girl? Is it possible that this florist is running the children, is sending them out, is kidnapping them for some reason, using them as child labor? Why does this woman who doesn't care for kids have a kid that's not really of her own? Or is it just a red herring? Doesn't have kids. She has not a single nurturing instinct. Never seen her do anything but chide any children who have dared to venture into her shop unattended. So that's a double mystery. Like, where is this kid coming from? Is it a kid who showed up like our kid? But more confusingly, why would this woman, Mrs. Roper, not Mrs. Roper, why would the florist take in a kid? Very strange. Mrs. Hamer's kid. This is the kid of Mrs. Hamer. Very strange. Okay, and then there's this whole thing about the wife of the pastor being sick on death's bed, death's door, but now he's recovering. Don't know why. And we're told that he hears that the reason the nails are needed is because of coffins. This woman says they haven't had a funeral in 11 months, so she doesn't believe people are dying and need coffins. So does that mean the nails are not being used for coffins? And then the most interesting thing, they get a letter, hand-delivered, plain white envelope, addressed to Mr. Goulding. Plain sheet, words cut from a local newspaper. Forget the boy, he's safe. If you persist, it will be bad for you. No punctuation. Cut out letters from newspapers so they can't be traced. Maybe the forest has something dodgy going on with the children. Yes. Maybe someone's leasing out the children as cheap labor. Rob says the nail client seems suspect. Unclear how he might be related to the kids. Anna says, yes, the forest woman is suspicious, but what is she doing with the children? Maybe the children are delivering drugs as child laborers to these sketchy adults. So I have a little bit of a theory, possible theory. So here's here's a theory for you. My theory goes something like this. That we're going to get a later letter. They're going to get a letter, this blacksmith. That says something like, or the kid's going to escape again and say something like, if you can come up with 1,000 pounds, you can buy my freedom and I'll come stay with you and be your kid. In other words, is the plot here to find well-off childless families who can't have children and sort of throw a homeless kid, a pitiful homeless kid, into their circle and get them to want to adopt him? Like, does someone know that this childless couple who wanted kids, who never had any, would be a good target for wanting to adopt this kid? So they've sort of dropped this pitiful kid off on their land, and now this couple has grown attached to him. He does the chores, he's all happy, and now they sort of have him disappear again, and now they're going to get a letter back that says pay the ransom and you can rescue him. So are they going to be approached to pay a fake ransom to rescue this kid? Rob says the letter doesn't seem to indicate they want any further contact. I agree that the current letter doesn't. I just wonder if the next that's my idea, that they are going to get another letter that says you have to pay to rescue Edward. Joe J. Anderson says that's an interesting theory, but then the florist was a big miss. Yes, that's exactly true. The florist throws a little bit of a monkey wrench into my theory. Yes, I agree. That creates the florist doesn't quite connect. Unless the florist is behind the plot. But I agree, the florist does not match this pattern that I'm proposing. Unless the florist is the one running it. Unless the florist is the one running it. I mean, a florist could have a little cart for carting around flowers. That could be the cart we're seeing. Doesn't have, it's no explanation for the nails, though. Is that just a red herring, the nails? Rom says, my bet is someone is running some sort of child labor ring, illegal work that requires small people. Is it possible that the florist is renting this illegal worker girl from these people? Like, what if someone is renting out illegal child labor and the florist is a customer? It's like a temp work for a little child labor temp worker place. And it says the nails are strange. What are they doing? It could be a total red herring. Unless he's building some big warehouse for children, for child labor. Anna says, okay, I have to go. See you next week. Rob says, maybe his deafness is important. They might require deaf-mute kids for what they're doing. That's an interesting idea. OJ says, if you're digging a mine, you might need nails to build the inner structure. Yeah. Yeah. He was dirty and disheveled, like he had been working a forge or a mine. But why would he run away? Why would he open the door? Why would he run away? Why would he open the door? That's the main thing that makes me think he's in on it. Rob says, what kind of valuable mines would they have in England, though? And how would you hide it? I mean, how would you hide a whole... How would you construct a mine that people wouldn't know about? Well, given this note, we know one of two things are true. Either he is being held by someone against his will, like someone using him for child labor, or my theory about this being part of a ransom fake operation is happening. But it's clearly not one of these cases where he's just a sleepwalker walking off from his home. Clearly something nefarious is going on. It's either child labor thing or it's part of a ransom operation. Local newspapers suggest that this is a local operation. Do we think it has anything to do with the preacher being sick and ill? And this same cart brought this letter. I wish I could find that cart. The owner of the carriage. That delivered the letter. Boy, that would give them away. The attorney will be bad for you, not bad for the boy. Kidnapping could work, but it remains unclear why the kid opened the door, unless the kid was involved in this plot. But why would he? I mean, my ransom thing explains that. It just doesn't explain the forest. Unless the forest is involved. But why would the forest have little kids running around? And is that overcomplicating it? All right, well, I think I'm not sure there's that much more for us to get out of this. I'm very curious to see how this case ends. Halfway through. Jody says, if it was a scheme to pay for getting the boy back, would they not have threatened to harm the boy? I mean, maybe, But maybe this is I mean, I think you have a point. You would think that they would want to minimize contact, and so the next letter they would get, they'd say, hey, we've got the kid. If you want him back, you have to pay us. It does seem weird that they'd be sending this first letter that said stop asking about him. But maybe this is the equivalent of like, don't talk to the police, we'll be in contact. But I do agree, it's not great. It's not great for my theory. It doesn't feel like the right letter you would send if your plan was to ransom him. But boy, you'd be taking a big risk by dropping off this letter yourself, wouldn't you? That's a huge risk to, if you're the person who's brought the boy away, now you're going to drive back and drop a letter. What if they come out and say, hey, stop? That's very risky behavior to be dropping off this letter, but I'm not sure if that's not like a flaw in the story rather than a usable clue. Hmm. All right. Any other theories before we go? Let me just experiment with some of my other views. I want to show, what's the thing I keep meaning to check out? I want to see if I've done anything different with the stats page. Where is that? Still no 8 concurrent viewers, 28 likes. But a bit of the screen is being occupied by that. I wish there was a better way to get more interesting stats showing while we're going live. Okay, what about this view? You can see now what I see on my monitor. Mostly. A little cut off. All right. I guess we're done. Rob's final comment is, whoever sent the letter knew they were inquiring about the boy, so they probably are somewhat local. That's a good observation. They're keeping an eye on him. That's a good observation. Yes, could be anyone in town, though. Or the police, for that matter, could be involved. All right, well, that'll end it here. Thank you for joining me. Next week, next Sunday, also at 1 p.m. I guess we're going to stick with this 1 p.m. throughout this whole series. We'll open and read the next letter. We'll probably play something else also between this Sunday and next Sunday. Not sure what. Maybe we'll finally get around to the Missing in the Caribbean cold case, or maybe another Sherlock Holmes consulting detective case. Thank you for joining me. I will see you next time.